It was a dark and rainy night. The moon hid itself from us like a child hiding under its blanket as he watched the two unaware move towards the monster on the screen. When most people would decide not to venture near a haunted asylum, except in movies, on a rainy night, these two content creators said, "Why not?" As we stood watching from the sidewalk where the night security had moved us, I think we caught something strange. Now watchers, don't listen to her.
No one lives any nearer than town. No one will come any nearer than that. In the night. In the dark.
Come with us as we drive around the former Georgia State Lunatic and Epileptic Asylum and allow me to tell you about some of the horrors that happened there. In this video, which might run a little long or I might end up splitting it into two parts, I will share what we saw on our way to our final destination. I will share the story behind our first stop and then talk about the horrors that took place at the Central State Hospital, one of the most haunted places in America. And last, I will share the terrifying story of a man who forced himself into this haunted place and the consequences he faced. Now, I promise you this is not a hunt for the supernatural channel, but ever since I captured the floating entity back in Maysville, I've been observing my surroundings with a keener eye, and I think I captured something else here. But I'm not sure. There has to be a perfectly good explanation for this. Please tell me in the comments what you think. Hey, if going around, whether it be in the US or overseas, and finding interesting stories is something that you would be interested in, then click that subscribe button. Because like me, I'm sure there are so much out there that you never knew about. And if you like my efforts in capturing these places and telling these stories, then click the like button to let me know. Then share these stories to inform your friends and family as well. And don't forget to comment. I look forward to reading all of them. A big shout out to all my subscribers. You are who I do this for. Love you guys so much. I am your host, LT Bartek. Now on to these stories. First stop is here, Highway 294. At first, we thought this was just fog and mist, but then we noticed that the hills were still smoking. We searched and found the reason why. You know what? I'll let these guys tell it.
The largest wildfire in the mountains is getting bigger. The Collett Ridge Fire is burning in Cherokee County near Andrews.
News 13's Rex Hodge reports on its current size, the structures now threatened, and the impact of today's rainfall.
The Collett Ridge Fire now encompasses more than 5,000 acres. The rain is helping a little bit, but it's still only 5% contained.
At this time, the Collett Ridge Fire is currently at 5,116 acres.
The U.S. Forest Service's Adrienne Rubiaco says 178 firefighters are on the scene near Andrews, responding from near and far.
As far as California.
To put the fire out. It's been burning now since an October 23rd lightning strike, getting bigger in dry, warm conditions. The majority of the fire is burning in the Nantahala National Forest, much of it in the backcountry.
But with all of that, it still did not mask the beauty of the autumn foliage. It was still a joy to drive there, and not even fire could take away the beauty of fall. Then we stopped for a few minutes to look around the ruins at the Oconee National Forest. In 1782, The Skull Shoals village began as a frontier settlement along the Oconee River. Skull Shoals was home to Georgia's first paper mill, water-powered sawmill, grist mill, and textile mills. I had to look up grist mill. It is a grain that is ground into flour. What is still here is the company's store and warehouse, which was built in 1845. In 1887, the town was destroyed by a flood, leaving it in economic ruin. The mills closed for good in 1900. Skull Shoals became part of the Oconee National Forest in 1959. Then we went to the former Georgia State Idiot, Lunatic, and Epileptic Asylum, aka Georgia State Sanitarium, aka Milledgeville State Hospital, aka the Central State Hospital. This is located in Milledgeville, Georgia. It is the first and largest insane asylum in Georgia and quite possibly the world. And boys and girls, it is massive. Let me interject here. While editing and with time to reflect, something is bothering me about this place. If it is so abandoned with the dangers of mold and threatening ceilings and floors, why are there so many lights left on inside? Are they left on to keep away a little bit more than the darkness? Tell me what you think in the comments. Why are almost all the lights left on? On December 28, 1837, the name Georgia State Idiot, Lunatic, and Epileptic Asylum was authorized for the lunatic, idiot, and epileptic. It would be located in the small rural town of Middle, Georgia, which was a town on the outskirts of Middlesville, Georgia, which was land stolen from the Muskogee Creek, an indigenous people. This hospital was the first to treat all three afflictions. 5 years later, in 1842, the hospital changed its name to the Georgia State Mental Hospital, after it was turned over to trustees and appointee Dr. David Cooper. Then, in 1929, it became known as Milledgeville State Hospital. In 1897, it changed its name again and was now called Georgia State Sanitarium. Today it is known as the Powell Building of Central State Hospital, probably named after Dr. Theophilus Organ Powell, who was the superintendent from 1879 to 1907. A little about the history of this awful place. This is bad, so be warned, guys. Sometime in 1841, construction began using more than 4,600 slaves and prisoners from the nearby prison. After construction, for the first year of the operation, the enslaved served as attendants to the patients until white attendants were hired and took over the role. The hospital would serve to treat and mistreat those who needed help and those who didn't. It has been said that homeless people who had all their faculties intact were sometimes snatched off the streets and taken there to be experimented on. The first patient was a 30-year-old man by the name of Tillman Barnett. He was a resident of Bibb County, Georgia. He was admitted on December 15, 1842. He was brought to the asylum chained to an ox cart by his wife and relatives. 6 months later, he was pronounced dead. His death record stated that he had died of maniacal exhaustion. Maniacal exhaustion occurs when your brain receives too much stimulation or has to maintain an intense level of activity without rest. Thousands of Georgians were transported to Milledgeville often without specified conditions or disabilities that warranted a mental illness classification, receiving minimal identification beyond being deemed peculiar. The hospital exceeded its capacity, and by the 1950s, the staff-to-patient ratio reached a dismal 1 to 100. Employing psychiatric methods of the era, such as lobotomies, insulin shock, and early electroshock therapy. Doctors also resorted to less sophisticated measures, including confining children in metal cages and subjecting adults to steam baths, cold showers, straitjackets, and treatment like douches and nauseant. Nauseant is a treatment that causes nausea. The first patients arrived with differing mental disorders, from religious hallucination to paranoia, depression, and alcoholism. Georgia residents deemed lunatic, idiots, or epileptic had to first stand trial before a jury with at least one physician in attendance. Now, if found by the judge to be a danger to the community, they would be sent to Milledgeville Asylum, shackled in chains. Unruly patients were locked in special blue-colored rooms with the thinking that this color would soothe them, but if it didn't work, they would be chained to a chair in the corner and left there. After the South lost the Civil War, the hospital began seeing an increase in black patients freed by the war. Though not as segregated as other institutions, the hospital had no separate buildings for black patients as required by law, leaving them to sleep outside on the hospital grounds. In 1866, the first colored-only building was built on campus, the start of an eventual second campus. By the 1960s, the Central State Hospital had grown to over 12,000 patients, at the most up to 13,000, with 200 buildings on the 2,000 acres. By 1872, there were only 4 doctors treating 448 patients at the hospital, with an annual budget of $100,000. To control the population, Dr. Green only admitted non-violent patients, putting 2 to 3 together in a small 10 to 12-foot room. The Milledgeville Asylum became a dumping ground not just for the truly insane, but for communities looking to get rid of their unwanted alcoholics, criminals, or elderly relatives. Other patients simply had nowhere else to go. By the beginning of the 20th century, overcrowding had become a significant problem at the facility. By 1910, 12 doctors cared for 3,347 patients. These doctors could no longer cope, and patients lacked proper treatment. There were now many reports of abuse, neglect, sanitary facilities, and seclusion rooms surfacing. Staff could only take care of the patient's basic needs and were unable to provide appropriate treatment for all their illnesses. By 1929, the Milledgeville State Hospital population had grown. There were now 6,000 patients in treatment, 600 per physician, and a waiting list of 1,500. Many buildings were deteriorating and had become fire traps. This was when the hospital expanded to include the extra 132 more acres. 4 new hospital buildings made of brick and modern interiors were built, plus a dedicated tuberculosis ward. In the 1940s, the Milledgeville State Hospital accommodated over 10,000 patients with average residence of 20 years. Attendants and nurses toiled for 60 to 70 hours weekly, earning a meager $74 monthly wage. Lobotomies were introduced in 1951 for severe cases, with 125 patients undergoing the procedure. Only 24 returned home, and an unknown number deteriorating further. In the 1960s, prison inmates on groundskeeping detail, not wanting to mow around the only grave markers, tossed thousands of numbered markers into the woods without recording their locations. Other markers were left in the underbrush. As memories faded, it was no longer clear where the true burial plots were. As a result, Central State Hospital Cemetery, aka Cedar Lane Cemetery, became one giant unmarked plot. After the first patient, Tillman Barnett, who I told you about earlier, the other patients that flowed in were Samuel Henderson, 47. He was a farmer from Cobb County, driven insane by, quote-unquote, religious study. He spent his final 11 years at Milledgeville. Julian Meyer, 23, a quote-unquote pauper, lunatic, and epileptic, from Savannah, troubled by disappointed affection, quote unquote. She died of consumption after spending 9.5 years there. Daniel Ashmore, 30, of Liberty County, arrived, quote unquote, demented from, quote unquote, intense application to study, and died in his sleep 4 years later. Patients were admitted for, quote-unquote, intemperance, meaning lack of moderation or restraint, aka overindulgence, aka religious excitement, domestic unhappiness, ill health, and jealousy. One early patient was described as rather idiotic. Of the first 50 patients, 29 died without ever leaving. Records list cause of death as dysentery, meaning infection to the intestines resulting in severe diarrhea, chronic diarrhea, convulsion, and general paralysis. Just 8 of the first 50 were pronounced cured. 100 years after it began, Milledgeville Hospital became involved in a movement that claimed to be progressive, the first sterilization of its patients. In 1937, Georgia was the last of the 32 states to pass a Eugenics law. This law targeted people. They thought that if they released them without sterilization, they would go and have children who would have tendency to severe physical, mental, or nervous disease or deficiencies. Doctors, politicians, writers, and others supported sterilization, saying it was for scientific and humanitarian reasons. An Atlanta doctor gave a speech supporting sterilization as a way to suppress the state's quote-unquote poor white trash, who might otherwise need to be euthanized. Dr. Thomas Peacock, the superintendent from 1948 to 1959, wrote a medical journal article in 1951 touting the prophylactic value of forced sterilization. The practice, he said, was protecting patients from psychotic episode induced by pregnancy and shielding children from mental trauma by psychotic parents. Sterilization spiked in the post-war era to about 200 a year between 1955 and 1960. Georgia ended the practice in 1963 after sterilizing almost 3,300 people, the 5th highest total in any state. 3,300 people. That's the 5th highest in the total in any state. Okay, let me continue. An author by the name of Peter Cranford saw all these atrocities against these poor souls and decided to investigate and write about it in his book titled But for the Grace of God. What he found was even more terrible, if you can imagine. In 1950 alone, Peter found that 3 patients died nearby after escaping. Another hanged himself with a bedsheet at the hospital. One patient beat another to death. And when a patient in the maximum security unit vomited on the floor, Cranford wrote 2 employees ordered him to clean up the mess with a towel and then forced him to eat the towel. The patient choked to death. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported in 2007 that as many as 136 state hospital patients had died under suspicious circumstances during the previous 5 years. 42 were patients at Central State. Some choked to death while eating without supervision. One died while hospital employees restrained him face down on the floor. Others died from poor or even non-existent medical treatment. The newspaper also found more than 190 instances in which the state confirmed patients abused by hospital employees. Milledgeville scout under the radar until 1959, until the Atlanta Constitution published articles by reporter Jack Nelson exposing the depths of abuse in the hospital. Nelson, in one of his reports, claimed that a nurse performed major surgery without a doctor's supervision, and that a physician moonlighting for a pharmaceutical company used experimental drugs on patients without their consent. Nelson also unearthed that the hospital did not have any psychiatrists on staff at the asylum. 1/4 of the doctors on staff had histories of alcoholism or drug abuse, and staff physicians had been hired directly off the hospital wards after they had received psychiatric treatment themselves. By the late 1960s, Georgia was opening 6 other regional psychiatric hospitals. Thousands of patients left as Milledgeville became Central State, and its slow decline began. Numbered poles, not headstones, adorned the hospital grounds, making the final resting place of an estimated 30,000 patients across 6 neglected cemeteries. Central State Hospital now stands as home to one of the world's largest graveyards for individuals with mental disabilities, encompassing both African American and white burials. In his book titled But for the Grace of God, Milledgeville, Peter Cranford wrote, and I quote, "Rows upon rows of numbered, small, rusted markers as far as you can see. No names, just numbers. It must be the most gruesome sight in Georgia. Unknown humans, shunned when living, deprived of their very name in death, and literally known only to God." End of quote. The hospital closed its doors in 2010. Now, here is a story I found rather interesting on Reddit. The name of the writer has been deleted. This obviously didn't happen to OP because inside his story are some things found in a discovery by a reporter. But I found it quite entertaining, much like a good ghost story. I will let the AI voice tell it verbatim. The title of the article or story written by the Reddit user is "I broke into Central State Hospital and what I found is horrifying." Listen.
I broke into Central State Hospital and what I found is horrifying. I decided it would be fun to start a YouTube channel mainly making videos on abandoned buildings. I live south of Georgia and was wondering, besides the haunted town of Savannah, is there any other abandoned or haunted locations? One I found is called the Central State Hospital and Asylum. This is Georgia's first insane asylum. So on July 15th, 2019, I woke up early in the morning and began my 2-hour drive. I live near the city, so it was odd for me to once see building after building turn into nothing but trees, which were nice for once. So after a long ride, I've arrived at my destination, ready for my first video. It was very empty, but everything was bright. For example, there's a nice sunny day, and the wind was blowing through the trees. The grass seemed freshly cut, and staring at the big building, which I can assume is the main building of the asylum, I felt more at peace than an eerie feeling. I got my equipment ready, strapping my GoPro camera to my baseball cap and putting on my bag with other materials, and began my walk around the premises, exploring the exterior of the main building. First thing I've noticed was a large water fountain. It still worked, but besides that, the building was, of course, old and vines were growing, covering the walls. Mother Nature was taking back what was rightfully hers. I approached the front door of the main building, and of course, it was locked with a sign warning to not enter the building due to its decay and mold, with dangerous animals like snakes, etc. But a locked door and a sign weren't going to stop me from entering, because of course, all I came here to do was go inside and explore the depths and shed light on something that is forgotten. I checked and checked, but all the doors were locked, but I was surprised to the lack of broken windows and vandalism on this structure. I never minded spray painting and sorts, but for once it was nice seeing its true beauty with no help from the so-called artist. When I walked around back, there was a set of stairs. I went up and found a path that leads inside the building, but of course the damn doors were locked again. But this time the glass on the door was broken, and I could see through, but to my amazement the lights were still on, which is odd for an abandoned building that is no longer in use. I reached through the broken, trying to unlock the door from the other side, but no luck due to it needing a key instead of a twist lock. Looking through that window one last time, seeing the filthy, broken down state of its interior, and what I can assume is a walk-through metal detector. I ventured my way back downstairs to be greeted with a security car pulling up to my side, the window rolling down with a man in the driver's seat. "You're not breaking into this building, are you?" the driver asked. "No, of course not. All the doors are locked," I sarcastically answered. The man in the driver's seat asked for my ID, which I was happy to oblige. He ran a quick background check on me and spoke through his walkie-talkie, telling whoever was on the other side of my existence. He then asked, "What's the purpose of your visit?" "I heard about this place online, so I came to make a video," I replied once more. He then went on to explain why I can't enter the facility and warns me of the mold and animals which lies inside, and that I wasn't allowed to be behind the building but for me to stay at the front and observe from the sidewalk. He gave me back my ID and I thanked him for the warning and made my way back to the front as he drove off behind me. I'm not giving up on this exploration so easily, I thought to myself. This place has tones of the building, which needs someone or something to explore every crevice of its interior. I need it inside and bad. I am not going to stand by the sidewalk or go home wasting a 2-hour drive, wasting gas and my off days from work, just because of a few locked doors, a sign, and a lonely security guard. I looked and checked my surrounding for any witnesses, and made my way to the next building, which was connected to the main building. When I got there, I was blessed seeing another set of stairs. When I got up, there was another locked door, but next to the door was a full-size window, which was broken, that I may be able to fit through. I looked through the window to see nothing but darkness. I got a flashlight out of my bag, turning it on and shining it inside. It was an empty room, but 2 sets of doors on the left side. One set was a double-sided door with what I can see clearly is a chain around it, and the next door over was also doubled, but no doors to be seen. I assumed it leads into a hallway. Making sure I wasn't going to cut myself on the glass, I made my way inside the building. Finally, my exploration begins. When I shine the light on the walls now, there are vandalism, spray paintings on the walls, the same-o dick drawings and slurs sprayed upon the walls of this decaying building. I then walked into the open doorway to see a hallway leading to the front of the building. When I got to the entrance, the front door was chained shut, and behind me to the right of the hallway is an elevator which looked crooked, and of course more paintings inside. There is no way in hell I'm stepping 1 foot in that elevator. There was also a room to the right of that front door, which what I believe is called a check-in center, and entered the room seeing a fallen filing cabinet with papers scattered on the floor. I picked up some of the papers and read them. Most were just pay slips and blood donations until I came across the accidents reports. In the 1950s, 3 patients died nearby after escaping. Another hanged himself with a bedsheet. One patient beat another to death. And when a patient in the maximum security unit vomited on the floor, 2 employees ordered him to clean up the mess with a towel and then forced him to eat the towel. The patient choked to death. Nurses performed major surgery without a doctor's supervision, and that a physician, moonlighting for a pharmaceutical company, used experimental drugs on patients without their consent. And more fit like that. I then came across a photo showing men in suits staring at a little boy, 5 or 6, who is locked inside a small metal cage. The boy stares into the middle distance, avoiding eye contact with the men on the other side of the bars, or with the camera. What the hell were they doing to these people? I whispered to myself. I then heard a noise coming from outside the room. It sounded like a scruffing sound. I peeked out the doorway to see nothing. I heard it again, this time from the elevator. I slowly made my way to the elevator with my flashlight and quickly shinned it inside. A possum hissed and jumped out of the elevator and crawls away, making that noise running. Down the hallway to the right of the elevator, I screamed and kept my flashlight on the possum, watching it go away. Then I've seen it, something I'll never forget. Someone or something jumped out of one of the doorways in that hallway, attacking the possum, eating it alive. I can hear the possum's shrieks of pain before giving in. I kept my light on the figure and watched as it stood up slowly looking at me. Its eyes were glowing. The being was completely black. I heard, as it struggles to breathe like a smoker with a hole in their neck, and it spoke. Is it someone new? It spoke, struggling to speak, tilting its head left to right, studying me. I froze in fright, horrified of what I'm seeing, and then another one pops out of the wall. How the hell is it doing that, sitting on the wall, not struggling? And then another one pops up, this time on the wall across from the second being. Jesus Christ! I whimpered to myself, they're coming out of the goddamn walls. Then one by one more appear from the ceiling, and now from the floor. All of them staring at me with their eyes glowing. I was still frozen, staring back at them, until they all started sprinting and crawling rapidly towards me. This broke me out of my trance and ran back down the hallway where I came from. I can hear them all shrieking and yelling, hearing their smoker inhales and exhales. I ran as fast I could see the window and the light shining through it. I must make it, I screamed in my head. I must survive. I crawled my way out of there as fast as I could. I made it out, but I didn't stop there. I still ran and ran until I got to my car. I started it, and as I backed out, I saw them, all of them, looking out the window, staring at me. Now I'm warning you not to go to Central State Hospital. Not because of the mold or the animals, but because the patients never left and they want out.
Well, that will be all for today, folks. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment all the things you know I like. And come back next week for another story of what happened here. Rather, this happened here. Anyway, do me a favor and love yourself and others, and I'll catch you on the next one. Love you. Bye.